Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
The dark wooden ceiling blurred before my eyes. My left side felt like it had been pierced by a red-hot rod, and the pain was spreading in waves throughout my body. It seemed to reach even the tips of my toes. I was coughing and wheezing, coughing up blood that stained my chin and cheeks, and ran down my neck to the back of my neck. My whole body was shaking and trembling. I was supposed to be taken to a hospital, but the place I am in clearly has nothing to do with medical facilities. So where am I? There is a jumble of images in my head. Memories from the past flash before my eyes. Maybe those who claim that before death your whole life passes before your eyes are right. True, in my case I see something else, bizarre pictures of events that never happened to me. Flash. I am 5 years old. My mother and I are returning from the store. They finally bought me a big, beautiful ball, and I am proudly carrying it in my hands. My mother looks at me and laughs happily. The ball is too heavy for a child's hands, and I drop it just as we approach the roadway. It rolls along the asphalt, and I rush after it. The next second I hear a scream of horror and the screech of brakes. I look up, a car is rushing straight at me. Time seems to freeze, and I clearly see the driver's face, white with fear. Somehow the car manages to brake. Mom is sobbing, hugging me so tightly that I am afraid to breathe. The driver of the car clutches the left side of his chest. I turn my head and see a strange old man, gray-haired, but with a young face. On his forehead are growths that look like horns. Flash. I'm 5 years old. I'm training at the clan's training ground. Kunai and shuriken fly straight to the target. For me, these are not just weapons. They are a gift from Madara, my beloved brother, so I treat them with special care. I'm not allowed on missions yet, but my father says that will change soon. My brother looks at me disapprovingly. He clearly doesn't like this arrangement. Does he think I'm a burden because I'm a girl? I'll prove him wrong. I'll become strong and be able to protect him. Flash. I'm 8. I'm crying in my room because Mr. Little has died. Mr. Little is my hamster. I had him for 2 years, and this morning I found him at the bottom of his cage, his paws curled up on his chest, his eyes glassy. My parents tried to replace Mr. Little with a new hamster, but it didn't work. Why do adults think children are stupid? Flash. I'm 8. I stand there clutching the hand of my last living brother, trying my hardest not to cry. The rain is pouring down my collar, and I'm shaking violently. But it's not from the cold. Today is the funeral of my mother and younger brothers. They didn't die on a mission, someone poisoned the well with drinking water. Many died that day, mostly women and children who couldn't yet hold a gun. The earth falls with a dull thud onto the coffin lid, immediately turning to mud. The sky is crying in my place. I already know who I'm going to kill on the next mission. My vision suddenly becomes unusually sharp. Flash. I'm 13. Wonderful school days and blah blah blah. My parents love to talk about their school years, and I have to pretend to listen to them. Although, I would much rather lock myself in my room and chat with my classmates on social networks. Doing this with the doors open was quite problematic. My mother would definitely start lecturing if she noticed that instead of doing her homework, her daughter was hanging out on the internet. And then there's my younger sister, who's just started going through a phase of being obsessed with anime and can literally chat for hours about her favorite characters, driving me crazy. It's not a room, it's a walk-through yard. I wish I could grow up soon. Flash. I'm 13. Another mission on the border of the Land of Fire was successfully completed, and Madara, several other clansmen and I were already returning home when we were ambushed. Senju. The battle didn't last long. Not only were we able to hold out without losses, but we also captured one of them, seriously wounding him. The remains of the rest were strewn around in artistic disarray. We attacked the wrong people. Even though my brother and I are a little old, we are already some of the strongest warriors in the clan. Apparently, I grinned too bloodthirstily, because the wounded Senju looked at me with horror and turned quite pale. That's right, be afraid. I won't torture you physically, but no one has cancelled torture illusions. Besides, I've long wanted to experiment with my own inventions. You will tell me everything you know. And I activated the Sharingan. Flash. I am 17. Today is my school graduation. As the headmistress said in her speech, from this moment your adult life begins. I am happy and, at the same time, sad. My carefree childhood is over, and soon I will have to make decisions on which my entire future fate will depend. Standing on the stage with my certificate in my hands, I found my mother and sister with my eyes. My mother looked with pride, because I am one of the best in the graduating class and now the doors to many universities are open to me. A slight sadness pierced my heart. It is a pity that my father did not live to see this moment. He died of a heart attack a year ago. Why did I strive so hard to grow up? Flash. I am 17. I am running through the forest, straining my last strength. I want to scream from the anger and despair that has overwhelmed me. My hands feel like they are wrapped in scarlet gloves. This is the blood of my friend. A former friend who became a traitor. How could he work for the enemy, betray his own clan? I hate him. I insisted on killing him myself. Watching him in agony, I felt no satisfaction as I had expected, only a deafening emptiness. Indeed, revenge brings no relief. Madara looked at me with such sympathy that I wanted to hit him. So I ran away. My throat was constricted from the sobs that were trying to escape, but I pulled myself together with an effort of will. I won't cry. My eyes started to burn as if sand had been poured into them, and the next moment I almost collapsed from chakra exhaustion. Flash. I am 24. The earth is shaking as if in a fit, rocks and debris are falling from above. But I don't notice anything. The air is full of dust, it gets into my lungs with every breath, causing a spasmodic cough. My eyes are watering, but I look for only one person, my sister. Why did we come here? Let her be okay, oh God. At the moment when I finally noticed my sister, quite alive, and sighed with relief, a piece of rebar hit me in the back between the shoulder blades, piercing my ribcage. Everything went dark before my eyes, blood gushed from my mouth. I fell to the side, feeling that my strength was rapidly leaving me. Before my eyes finally closed, I saw that strange old man from my childhood again. But I no longer had the strength to think about it. I'm 24. And I died. Flash. I'm 24. The battle with Senju is in full swing. My fire technique collides with Senju Tobarama's water dragon. The area around us is shrouded in steam. Immediately, kunai fly out towards me. Moving a few centimeters to the side is enough to avoid this clumsy attack. Only at the last moment do I notice a strange seal on one of the handles. This time, I can't dodge. Damn experimenter. He managed to get me after all. The battle stops at that very moment. Madara is there in the blink of an eye, catching me, not letting me fall. Pain spreads through my body and I have to grit my teeth to keep from groaning. I won't give my enemies that satisfaction. Senju Hashirama offers to make peace again, and I can see from my brother's face that Madara is ready to agree to this. And I do something that I will probably regret. I dissuade him. I also want peace, but I am not ready to forgive him yet. Madara looks confused and then we disappear in a cloud of smoke. My consciousness is covered with a bloody veil, and I understand that this is the end. With my last strength, I cling to my brother's hand and whisper. When I die, take my eyes, and I switch off. Apparently, forever. I'm 24. And I died. Flash. 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 Or not. The kaleidoscope of memories was still spinning in my head, and I was thinking hard. First, I had to decide, who am I? I am Irina Lebedeva, whispered part of my consciousness. I am Uchiha Azuna, the other one immediately objected. A hysterical laugh escaped my throat. And then a wave of pain washed over me again and my consciousness floated away into darkness. Opening my eyes was like an achievement, my eyelids felt like they were sewn shut with a strong thread. At first, I was even afraid that my brother, Azuna's brother, had fulfilled my request without waiting for my death. Fortunately, the fear was short-lived. I looked at the wooden ceiling again. The feeling of duality of consciousness did not disappear, but but now the memories no longer flashed before my eyes. I still couldn't understand who I was. One part of my consciousness claimed that my name was Irina. I was born and lived in Russia. I went to the mountains with my sister to relax. We were near the ski lift when an earthquake happened and I was pierced by a metal rod. The other part objected that I was Uchiha Azuna. I lived in the territory of the Land of Fire in the Uchiha clan settlement. I had no sister, but a brother, and I was pierced by the sword that was in Senju's hands. And these parts could not agree among themselves. I, who considered myself Irina, definitely knew the surname Uchiha, but did not associate it with myself. Moreover, she, that is, I, clearly remembered that this surname was connected with my sister and her hobby. I could not recall anything more specific. Feeling that my head was about to split from this confusion, I decided to go the other way. If I couldn't figure out who I was, I could figure out whose body I was in, although I didn't want to think about the fact that having two personalities in one body smacked of dissociative disorder. From what I recall, the girls' appearances were completely different. But my plan had one significant drawback: I wasn't going to be able to get to a mirror anytime soon. So I focused on what was available. To begin with, it was worth at least examining my hands. Irina and I had a distinctive feature: a burned scar on the index finger of my right hand. I tried to raise my hand, and I succeeded. However, the triumph was short-lived. From the small effort, my heart began to pound like crazy, and a wave of monstrous weakness rolled over me. Having caught my breath with difficulty, I decided to moderate my ardor and not make any unnecessary movements for now. The loss of blood made me sleepy, and my eyes closed on their own. Already plunging into a saving state, I heard someone's quiet steps. My body's reaction was a complete surprise. My muscles tensed, and I tried to jump to my feet, simultaneously groping for something with my hand on my right thigh. I don't even know how this should have looked in a normal situation, but now I just fell like a sack onto the futon. And, as luck would have it, I landed on my sore side. My vision went dark, and only by some miracle did I not lose consciousness. However, I didn't have to think about how the hell I was going to get back into a normal position. Warm hands grabbed my shoulders and gently turned me around, laying me on my back again. I looked up and saw black eyes full of worry. Part of my mind was definitely unfamiliar with this person. Another part claimed that this was the closest person, Madara. Brother. Meanwhile, it would be strange to call him brother even in my thoughts, stroked my head soothingly and said, "Izuna, it's just me." Well then. It seems I don't need a mirror anymore. It's funny, but the two halves of my consciousness perceived this phrase differently. The first as unknown gibberish, a simple set of sounds that carry no semantic load, the second as quite coherent speech. Although, nothing funny. If this continues, then the local house of sorrow is my nearest destiny. Meanwhile, Madara continued. How do you feel? Like a person who was put through a meat grinder, I realized after I finished speaking that I had just done something incredibly stupid. Madara frowned and looked at me with surprise and suspicion. And then it dawned on me, I had spoken Russian. Having barely suppressed the sudden panic, I tried to focus on my inner perception. Now the knowledge of Miyazuna was as necessary as air. Intuition told me that Madara was not to be trifled with. It was not that I thought he could bury his own sister somewhere in the forest, but what would he do if he discovered that the one he considered Izuna was no longer her? I did not want to test this on my own skin at all. Perhaps fear mobilized hidden reserves of strength or some other factor unknown to me, but I literally felt that the duality inside me had disappeared. Now I recognized myself as a whole person, albeit with two sets of memories. The panic subsided. Sorry, I seem to be delirious. To my relief, this time I chose the right language. It's not surprising, apparently I was able to dispel his suspicions, if you consider how many drugs the Iranians stuffed you with. I frowned. From Izuna's memories, it was pretty clear that medics heal with chakra, whatever that was, and not with medicine. Was the Uchiha clan really that bad with medics? Madara noticed my puzzled expression and smiled sadly. You yourself called them ignoramuses. Luckily, at least they were able to stop the bleeding, the Azurov blockheads. But hardly anyone would agree to invite outside doctors, and I can't risk it. It's okay, I tried to smile. I'll get through this. Even in this state, you are true to yourself. Madara's face brightened, but he frowned again. He carefully took my hand in his palms, ran his thumb from the bone on my wrist to the place where my pulse was beating unevenly and weakly. "Does it hurt a lot?" he asked quietly. I listened to my feelings. My side was throbbing, but the pain was not strong, and most likely arose from a recent fall. Otherwise, I absolutely did not feel the left half of my body. Apparently, I was diligently injected with painkillers. Therefore, to my brother's question, this time the word did not cause internal resistance, I answered negatively. "Try to get some sleep," Madara said quietly. "They'll change your bandage this evening." I tiredly closed my eyes and, after a while, actually fell asleep. Chapter 2 Several days passed, merging in my mind into one endless gray stream, periodically colored with crimson stripes. The clan medics changed the bandages and carefully fed me all sorts of medicines under Madara's watchful eye. The presence of the clan leader clearly drove them into a state of extreme terror, so they ran away the moment they finished the procedures. I would have admired such agility, if I had found the strength in myself. My health gradually improved, although the abundance of medications periodically made me sick. The Uchiha really turned out to be lousy doctors, but their skills were enough to keep me from dying. My mental state was much better than my physical state. I realized that my consciousness was in someone else's body, and, in addition, I had the memory and knowledge of that body, and possibly skills. It was not yet possible to check the latter. Strangely, I did not feel any fear or surprise about this. In general, all the emotions associated with my past life were so muted that at times they seemed unreal. There was a slight longing for my family, who had remained somewhere in another world, and nothing more. It was as if I was looking at them from behind a thick layer of glass, and I couldn't even get angry about it. Every time I tried to focus on my mother and sister, my thoughts went away, and after a few minutes I could hardly remember what I was thinking about. Izuna's emotions and feelings were perceived more vividly and fully. Love for his brother, responsibility for the clan, anger at the stubborn elders, irritation at the equally stubborn youth. There was another emotion, too, a deep and long-standing hatred for the Senju clan. But now it faded, as if someone had pressed a brightness button. The hatred was felt on the periphery, but no longer burned the soul like napalm. I was more interested in memories than in emotions. Having carefully studied Izuna's memory, I realized that I had found myself in a damn strange place. All people, and not only, here have chakra. A mixture of spiritual and physical energy circulating through some analog of the circulatory system. In shinobi, and this was exactly what Izuna and Madara were, as well as other members of the Uchiha clan and many others, the focus is more developed than in ordinary civilians, and the amount of chakra in the body is an order of magnitude, or even several, more. By controlling this very chakra with the help of seals, fingers folded in a certain way, shinobi could do amazing things, strengthen the body, achieve amazing strength, speed and endurance, use elemental techniques or immerse opponents in illusions. It was hard to wrap my head around all this, but after a short thought, I decided to accept this information as a given. In any case, after recovery I would be able to check everything. The Uchiha clan itself and their abilities were of additional interest. And if fire techniques did not seem out of the ordinary against the background of what was known, then such a thing as the Sharingan, with its capabilities, caused admiration, from banal lip reading to copying other people's techniques, albeit with limitations. The only thing that overshadowed my childish delight was the reasons for which such eyes awaken. Izuna, and, therefore, I have Mangekyo, that is, the highest form of Sharingan, which means that in a relatively short life she has lost a lot of loved ones. The world itself was a bit like Japan, or rather, its medieval version. Unfortunately, the traditions and history of this country were not particularly familiar to me, so I could not determine the level of similarity. About a week later, I was able to get up on my feet, not without help from Madara, of course. Brother, it was becoming easier to call him that. I involuntarily began to associate myself with Izuna at times, carefully supported me under the elbow. I did not agree to more, ready at any moment to catch my body in case of a fall. Slowly moving my legs and touching the wall with my other hand, I somehow hobbled to the toilet. With difficulty, I convinced Madara that I was not going to faint and closed the door behind me. If I had any doubts, they were gone now, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I was looking at a thin, black-haired girl with piercing black eyes. Her naturally pale skin now had a gray tint, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Well, now I am Azuna Uchiha. Finally and irrevocably. A semi-dark little room, lit only by the dim light of candles. These candles, black, red and white, are placed literally everywhere, and on the free surfaces there are several crystal balls and even a stuffed raven. The smell of incense makes your head spin a little. On the table, covered with a black cloth with an image of a pentagram, there are 2 cards. A life full of deaths, the fortune teller's eyes seem to glow with an otherworldly light. The sound of her voice makes you shudder. This life does not belong to you, but you will find yourself in its place. You will feel the same pain. A devilish grin blossomed on her lips. Someone else's life will depend on your decisions. I look with horror at the image of a skeleton, in a black robe and with a scythe in his hand. Flash. The earth falls with a dull thud onto the coffin lid. Flash. My hands are covered in scarlet gloves of alien blood. Flash. A sharp blade emerges from Madara's chest. Behind him stands the one who just pierced my brother. Hashirama Senju. Flash. 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 I wake up screaming. I have this nightmare every night. With different variations, but some things remain the same. 2 scenes, the fortune teller's prediction and Madara's death, are always present. I remember that visit to the fortune-telling salon. My friends and I were still schoolgirls and thought it would be fun. I ran out of the dark room in tears and swore to myself that I would never joke about such things again. I was literally shaking with horror. The picture of Madara's death was strange, to say the least. Unlike the memories, this one seemed to have been painted. It wasn't hard to recognize Madara and Senju Hashirama, but they seemed older. Both were pretty battered. And Senju also looked exhausted and somehow sick, but that was of little comfort to me. Am I seeing a possible future, or is this a figment of my sick imagination? I can only say one thing for sure: all the other dreams were connected to reality, and this is alarming. Izuna's feelings for Madara were very strong, and I myself had already become attached to him. I thought a lot about where I was, and I remembered reading an article about the theory of multiple worlds. This theory assumes the simultaneous existence of a huge number of universes. Any action that has more than one possible outcome forces the universe to create copies of itself, taking into account all the probabilities. And all these worlds exist independently of each other. Perhaps I have entered one of these parallel worlds, and somewhere here there is a complete physical copy of me. Also, this could explain the dreams about Madara. In some other world he died exactly like that. Or not in another world, but in this one? In that case, should this dream be taken as prophetic? Did my possession of Azuna's body cause her brother's death or prevent such an end? Unanswered questions. Until I started moving on my own, Madara spent most of his time at my bedside, leaving me alone only at night. He usually studied reports and dispatches, sometimes calling his closest advisor, Uchiha Hikaku, to him and giving orders. Hikaku, a handsome guy with his hair pulled back into a ponytail, was always polite and always interested in my well-being, despite the murderous looks that Madara threw at him. Several times Hikaku brought postal scrolls, but my brother only glanced at them and burned them without reading them until I became interested. A proposal for negotiations. From Hashirama Senju. I sat on the futon, leaning back against the pillows, and looked at my hands, graceful wrists and thin long fingers. Only small calluses on the palms indicated that these hands were used to holding weapons, otherwise nothing gave away the skilled warrior in Azuna. And you're not even interested? I already know what's there. Madara gave me a strange look. But why are you interested in this? Aren't you against peace? Not at all, I allowed myself to smile. You've never talked to me about it after that incident on the river. I think I managed to surprise him. I'm just against negotiations in the current circumstances. My brother looked at me expectantly, clearly waiting for me to continue. The clan is already at a disadvantage. There are almost 3 times fewer of us, and the trend is depressing. Soon the Senju will simply crush us with numbers. But you know that yourself. A shadow ran across Madara's face. And then there's my injury. Do you think that if you accepted Senju's offer, would he treat me? Madara nodded, without even thinking about the question. And what concessions would be required of you in return? The brother frowned. Hashirama wouldn't. He may not. Madara's faith in this man was astounding, even after so many years. And his brother, yes, I carefully weighed my next words. But now my injury can be turned to our advantage. Hashirama Senju is sometimes very noble. We must take advantage of that. Aren't you exaggerating too much? After all, he is the head of the clan. He won't make concessions, but no, faith turned out to be not as boundless as I first thought. Very good. But it will allow us to save face. Besides, he is clearly worried now, otherwise he would not have written almost every day. Madara was silent for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. I like the changes in you, Aizu-chan. I definitely do. I looked at the tree, like a ram at a new gate. The saying came to mind, that grew on the edge of one of the clan's polygons and tried to overcome my fear. So far, unsuccessfully. I felt quite well. The wound had long since closed, covered with a thick layer of scar tissue, but pain still accompanied any sudden movement. Getting used to life in the new world was going faster than I thought. Perhaps it was due to that same emotional retardation that arose every time I remembered my past life. My leisure time could hardly be called varied. I spent most of my time in my room studying scrolls. In order to read the texts, I had to make significant efforts. Even though the meaning of the hieroglyphs popped into my head, it was very difficult to perceive them. Interest in the new world flared up with a frantic force, and I searched for any available information, from history to the mechanism of action of various techniques. To my disappointment, most of the scrolls were reduced to the annals of the clan and various legends, which could not give an objective picture of the world, only food for thought. I spent the free time from reading outside the house, walking around the settlement and the surrounding area. My clanmates greeted me warmer than Madara, and that was a bit of a shame. During the time spent on the hospital bed, I managed to see for myself that he was a wonderful person, albeit with a very difficult character. Even being next to his sick sister, he took care of the clan as best he could. Therefore, I wanted to strangle some of the Uchiha with great force. Well, or immerse them in some nasty illusion, as an option. All that was left was to learn how to create them. As a result, I fled to the farthest part of the village, to one of the training grounds that were located right next to the forest. And now I was struggling with myself. In Azuna's memories, I saw shinobi walking and even running on trees or water. I had a completely childish desire to be able to do the same. Of course, I would have preferred to train on the water, but it was a long way to the river, and besides, it was on the border of clan lands, and on the opposite bank, the territory already belonged to the Senju. Madara's sister jumped on trees even with her eyes closed, and her body had all the necessary skills, but I was still afraid. My knowledge of physics from my previous life was enough to understand what would happen to me if I fell from a great height. With a heavy sigh, I sat down to meditate. Perhaps if I could feel the chakra in my body well, I would gain confidence. I closed my eyes, cleared my mind as much as possible and began to breathe evenly, calming down. In my mind I was transported to an apple orchard similar to the one my grandmother once had. It always amazed me with its beauty, and I could sit for hours under the tree, admiring the white and pink blossoms. Gradually, I switched off extraneous thoughts, concentrating on the rhythm of my breathing. I imagined how I was breathing in clean air filled with the scent of flowers, how with each breath I was filled with energy, slowly spreading through every cell of my body. When my body began to feel completely different, light as a feather, I felt that time had changed its speed, became viscous, like molasses. Concentrating on my body, I tried to feel how the chakra flows through the channels. Apparently, Izuna's experience had an effect, because I was able to sense the chakra the first time. I felt it slowly flowing through the circulation system, and tried to change its speed. The chakra ran faster. I slowly opened my eyes, trying not to miss this state, took a leaf from the nearest tree that I had prepared earlier, pressed it to my palm and directed the flow of chakra there. The leaf held as if glued. To complete the experiment, I carefully shook my hand in the air. The leaf did not move from its place. Pleased with the result, I channeled chakra into my feet. I no longer felt fear, so I placed my foot on the tree and happily felt how my foot literally glued itself to the trunk. Slowly, I transferred my weight to this leg and added the other one to it. It was uncomfortable to be in this position due to the shifted center of gravity, but Azuna's body quickly suggested how to fix it. Carefully, with the speed of a crippled snail, I moved up, successfully reached the nearest branch and hung upside down. Blood rushed to my head, but I did not notice it. I wanted to squeal with delight. I must have lost my concentration due to strong emotions, because the next second I felt like I was in a state of free flight. Out of fear, I put my hands forward, miraculously managing to turn over in the air, and fell to the ground. However, my body's reflexes did not fail me, and I managed to soften the fall by directing chakra to the places that came into contact with the hard surface of the training ground. A throbbing pain radiated from my left side, my palms were sore, and I cursed myself with the last words. I had practiced, so to speak. I hope I don't end up in bed for many days again. Your brother will kill you, and he will be right, you brainless chicken. Somehow getting to my feet, I, pressing my hand to the scar, trying to somehow ease the pain, trudged towards the house by a roundabout way, so as not to disturb my clanmates with my disheveled appearance. Who knows what rumors will spread through the settlement if they see me. When I got home, I found Madara in his office. By that time, I had recovered a little and hoped that everything would be okay. I didn't want to worry my brother. Madara carefully wrote out the last lines of the rather long letter and put the scroll aside. Then he looked at me for a long time. I even managed to get scared that he noticed everything, and said, "We agreed to meet with the Senju clan. We need to prepare for negotiations." Last night I had another nightmare, only now there was a new picture in it. Madara stands on a high cliff, arms folded across his chest, looking down with disdain at the hordes of shinobi below him. Cracks snake across his face, and the whites of his eyes are a frightening black. Chapter 3 A boy of about 7 is running down the street. His face is white with fear, and this is not surprising. There are bodies of dead people lying on the ground. Many bodies. There are traces of a struggle all around, broken counters, damaged walls, throwing iron scattered everywhere in huge quantities. Flash. The same boy, but no longer on the street. He stands on the threshold of a spacious room and stares, without stopping, at 2 bloody bodies. His eyes are full of tears. Behind the bodies I notice a vague black shadow. And I wake up. Something in this dream scared me more than the fact of reprisals against people, the sign of the Uchiha clan on the walls of houses. On the first day of negotiations, something unpleasant happened to me. My weakened body, which had also recently received another shock, could not withstand the stress and passed out. The scar burned like fire all day long, multicolored circles swam before my eyes, and there was a distinct metallic taste in my mouth, so the result was natural. I woke up lying on a futon in one of the tents on neutral territory where the negotiations were taking place. Hashirama Senju was slowly moving his hand, covered in green medic chakra, along my scar. The pain was gone. When Senju finished his manipulations, I slowly stood up on my feet, leaning on Madara, and not forgetting to thank him for his help. The younger Senju showed up right there, looking at him with disdain and twisting his lips in mockery. "You won't cry. You won't give him that satisfaction. You'll grit your teeth, straighten your back, and pretend everything's fine. Pull yourself together, wimp." A nasty grin blossomed on her lips. One of those that caused shivers of horror in all the enemies she, Izuna, had to interrogate. A promising grin. Promising a lot of suffering. Izuna had specially rehearsed it in front of the mirror, spending more than 1 hour before she was satisfied with the result. I thanked her in my mind. The younger Senju no longer mocked me. This scene really spoiled my mood. Madara suggested that we take a few days off, but I wanted to follow the progress of the discussion, since I was actively involved in working out our position. The negotiations threatened to be lengthy. Both sides agreed with the first point, concerning the cessation of active clashes between clans. In principle, this point was the easiest on the agenda, since everyone was tired of constant war, and the possibility of freely passing each other on neutral territory was tacitly supported. The second point was the exchange of prisoners. It just so happened that there were more Senju prisoners than Uchiha prisoners at the moment. Hashirama-san proposed an exchange of all for all. This is where the first disagreements began. The thing is that the prisoners were essentially one of the few levers that were currently in the hands of our clan. The Uchiha situation at the moment was close to the catastrophic mark. Due to the significant difference in numbers, the Senju were beating the Uchiha clan on all fronts. And this was not just about direct military clashes. Members of both clans were, first of all, mercenaries, and lived by fulfilling various orders from civilians. The fewer of us there were, the fewer orders we could fulfill, the more the Senju were pushing us out. This winter, the situation could become critical, and Madara and I could not allow the clan to simply die out from hunger. Therefore, we were going to turn the difference in the number of prisoners to our advantage, using them as an additional guarantee that our demands would be met. So, you're suggesting introducing quotas for fulfilling orders? It seems you're not in a position to dictate terms to us. Tobirama narrowed his red eyes angrily. A mischievous thought even flashed through his mind that with the Sharingan activated, the difference between us would be minimal. The albino looked very much like my clanmates, only the color was different. It seems you want to cancel the truce? I narrowed my eyes no less angrily. Calm down, Aizu-chan. Madara, oddly enough, acted as a peacemaker. Considering that we are going to build a village together, this is a completely reasonable demand. He turned to Senju. Moreover, we are not proposing to introduce equal quotas. But I must be sure that the members of my clan will be provided with orders. Quite reasonable, Hashirama-san agreed. This point can be included in the alliance treaty. Tobirama visibly grimaced at these words, but was forced to agree. Negotiations continued. The third point is the conclusion of the actual alliance treaty. The Senju insisted that the alliance should be not only political, but also military. There was logic in this. It is not enough to simply build a village, it will have to be defended, and it would be strange if only one clan were to take on the defense. In principle, I agreed with this point, as did Madara, but my intuition, literally screaming after a recent dream, told me that in order to preserve the clan, I should keep some distance from the village. Or regulate the relationship so that no claims could arise at all. I understood with my mind that the latter was hardly possible, but I wanted to protect the clan as much as possible. Madara rejected the option of the Uchiha continuing to live in their settlement, but agreed that all the clan's responsibilities should be spelled out as precisely as possible. Therefore, our starting position was to conclude an exclusively political alliance, which was able to surprise both Senju quite a bit. They categorically did not want to accept such a position, and bargaining began. The result of many hours of arguing, sometimes in raised tones, was a compromise, which provided for providing military assistance to the village in the event of an external attack, refusal to participate in paramilitary operations outside the settlement, except in cases where refusal to carry out an operation endangers the lives and health of villagers, as well as the creation of a joint military police to ensure internal security. I particularly insisted on this last point, arguing that people who maintain order are often not liked, and such a burden should be shared. Further negotiations concerned the future political structure of the village. I had no illusions about who would become the head of the village. Hashirama Senju had such an amazing charm that even his recent enemies were drawn to him. The situation needed to be balanced, and the most logical solution was to appoint a representative of the allied clan as the closest advisor and deputy. Thus, if Hashirama-san became the head, then his advisor would be someone from the Uchiha. Currently there were 3 candidates, Madara, Hikaku, and me. If one day someone from the Uchiha received the highest position, then Senju should become his advisor. The Council of Clans was to play an important role. When I proposed this idea to my brother, the basis for creating such a governing body was my knowledge of the work of the parliaments of my world, as well as what Azuna remembered about the Council of Elders. In the end, something in between came out. But gradually this proposal acquired points that surprised me. I suppose that at first there will only be 2 clans on the council. Tobirama looked at me with interest, and I thought that Madara was wrong to say who the author of this proposal was. It's hard not to feel like a guinea pig under the gaze of the younger Senju. Probably many will want to join us, and I don't think it would be reasonable to give everyone equal rights. Not right away, anyway. Do you have something against equality, Tobirama-san? I couldn't resist making a joke, although I doubt the participants in the conversation understood its essence. Equality is a myth, Azuna-san, Tobirama snapped. I don't know what irritated him more, my name or the need to add a respectful suffix to it. Right now, the risks are too great to allow someone to put a spoke in our wheels. I propose introducing the right to block any decisions. Only for our clans. I had a hard time not laughing. The mercenary village will have its own micro-UN. It's a shame the humor of the situation can't be explained to anyone. In total, the negotiations lasted several weeks. Gradually, we came to compromises on all the contentious points of the future agreement. We developed a number of rules that would later become the basis for the laws of the village. We agreed on the division of spheres of activity. First of all, this concerned the future hospital. At first, the Senju were to be in charge of treatment, who also took on the responsibility of training future doctors. I swore to myself that I would send my clansmen to study, if necessary, with kicks. The academy, both the Uchiha and the Senju could teach the younger generation a lot, so the responsibility for providing teachers to the future academy fell equally on both clans, ensuring internal and external security. Tobarama proposed a project that involved creating a secret police and a special sabotage squad in one bottle. Very bad. Madara stands with his arms crossed over his chest and frowns. We are at the clan training ground. My brother decided to check how much I have recovered. He is clearly not satisfied with the result. You're reacting too slowly. Still feeling unwell? My sluggishness had a very prosaic explanation, a desynchronization between Izuna's body and my consciousness. As long as I allowed my body to move on reflexes, my speed was normal, and I could successfully repel my brother's attacks, though without the slightest chance to counterattack. But as soon as I took control of my body, my reaction immediately slowed down. Just for a second, but in this world, even such an interval is enough to go to the forefathers before the appointed time. But I couldn't tell Madara about this, so I just shrugged my shoulders. Everything is fine, my thoughts are just occupied with other things. I'll catch up. The smile didn't produce the desired effect. Very bad, repeated the brother. The enemy will not wait for you to finish your thought. I promise to improve, Nii-san. Madara nodded reluctantly. So that I don't leave the settlement alone. I was mentally happy about this order. Even though the truce with the Senju had already taken effect, who knew who I might run into in the vast forests of the Land of Fire that surrounded our village. I was in a world where clan wars were not a thing of the past, which meant that I could only feel safe on my own territory. The Uchiha clan had too many enemies to wander around anywhere while I couldn't fully utilize Izuna's skills. And the thought that I would have to kill someday depressed me. For me, killing a person remained savagery, although I understood that the meaning of the phrase, kill or be killed, is relevant in this world as nowhere else. There was another thing that scared me almost to the point of fainting. Izuna, being a master of illusions, often used her abilities when interrogating prisoners. Torture genjutsu, without causing physical injury, crippled the psyche no less. The probability of getting a drooling idiot at the exit was even higher than during a normal interrogation. Izuna did not care, but it made me shudder. I could only hope that the thunder would not strike soon. In the meantime, I was meditating and training, trying to increase my reaction speed as much as possible so as not to rely only on the body's reflexes. During meditations, I noticed an interesting thing. In addition to my own chakra, I could also sense the surrounding chakra. Not see with the Sharingan, but feel. After going through a number of scrolls in the house, I found those that could help with the development of this ability, and now I was training hard. After some time, it turned out that I could not only sense the chakra of trees or animals, but also feel the surges that arose from the use of elemental techniques. These surges were so different from the usual natural background that it was almost impossible to confuse them with something else. The construction of the village was in full swing. Hashirama-san and Madara watched the work with some special delight. My brother even came up with a name for the future settlement, Konoha, the village hidden in the foliage. I often saw both of them on the top of the cliff, which had become their favorite place. I was glad that Madara had found a friend again, but this joy was overshadowed by nightmares in which my brother continued to die at the hands of the elder Senju. There was no understanding of why this was happening, and anxiety did not leave me. Sometimes Madara would disappear somewhere, and his absence could last for several hours. But my brother didn't want to explain anything to me. I'll definitely tell you everything, Aizu-chan. Madara gently ran his hand through my hair. Be patient. What scared me most was that he returned in a foul mood, which had been rare lately. Tobarama Senju almost never caught my eye, which was good news. Every time I saw him, my side would ache, despite the fact that Hashirama-san did everything to save me from the consequences of the injury and the crude treatment that the clan proudly called Aryan ninjutsu. The news of the peace between the old enemies spread throughout the Land of Fire and far beyond. Is it any wonder that we received delegations daily from many clans, who were testing the waters for joining such a powerful union? Some of them were already involved in the construction, others were still looking around, but they showed such obvious interest that there was no doubt about their decision. There was another category, spies. And not only from other countries. It seemed that the daimyo of the Land of Fire treated the founding of the village with a fair amount of suspicion, although he publicly demonstrated a different attitude. Tobarama dealt with this category with my possible participation, which consisted of me presenting him with reports on everything that was happening, written by some of my clansmen who were specially assigned to observe the surrounding situation. I myself was torn apart and very much regretted that there were only 24 hours in a day. One of the most difficult tasks fell on me, supply. Controlling supplies turned out to be extremely difficult. Taking advantage of the confusion, some traders tried to make money, some simply inflated prices, some delayed deliveries, some tried to sell low-quality goods. There were also those who, having received payment, did not deliver the goods at all. It was precisely one of these cases that I was going to deal with. A caravan with food was supposed to arrive in Konoha 3 days ago. Remembering the problems I had with control, and remembering Madara's orders, I went to look for my brother to report the situation and ask for a couple of people to accompany me. I wasn't going to just sit in the village. Madara showed up on a cliff, which didn't surprise me at all. His mood was foul again. But in the bright light of day, I noticed one more thing that scared me even more than his mood swings. The black irises of his eyes now had a grayish tint, as if they were covered with a film. This meant only one thing: my brother was blind due to the use of the Sharingan, or rather, its highest form, Mangekyo. But what was the point of using it? After all, he hadn't participated in battles for a long time. Maybe you'll tell me what's going on with you. I couldn't hold back my emotions. Where have you been? And why are you ruining your vision? Nisan, I'm worried. It's not time yet, Madara shook his head. When I'm done, you'll be the first to know. But that's not what you wanted to talk about, is it? I need to leave Konoha. I want to take a couple more people with me. Do you mind? The brother shrugged. Go ahead. You won't even ask where? And where to? You're unbearable sometimes, I snorted. I'll report back when I get back. I hope this is just a misunderstanding. One of the caravans has gone missing. Really? Then take someone from Senju too. Why? Honestly, I didn't want to have any more contact with them. Even though we had formed an alliance, the relationship between people was very tense. The memory of the recent conflict and all the pain that had to be experienced was still fresh. The circle of hatred is not so easy to break. And thinking about the fact that you could be stabbed in the back at any moment is below average pleasure. We must set an example of working together. Okay, so it's an example. I had to agree with this argument. I found Hashirama-san, explained the situation to him, and, accompanied by 2 Senju I didn't know and Uchiha Izamu, a relative of Hikaku, I set off on my journey. We were running along a road that had appeared as a result of the movement of a huge number of people and carts. A warm wind was blowing in our faces, and gigantic trees were flashing on the sides. In my world, I had never seen plants of such a size. Having activated the Sharingan, I noticed that the amount of chakra in the trees significantly exceeded the usual indicators. Moreover, the ground itself was literally radiating with chakra. This was worth thinking about in more detail. The area of the strange forest was of considerable size and clearly defined boundaries. I wonder what the nature of this anomaly was. There was another area with the same parameters, but quite far from here. Hashirama-san often visited that forest, but he did not voice his thoughts. Sometimes, giant shadows would flash through this strange forest, moving so quickly that even the Sharingan could hardly track them. After almost 2 hours of running, I felt multiple chakra surges ahead, unlike those of humans or animals. They varied in intensity and most resembled the effects of elemental techniques, This is where my recent training came in handy. The air smelled of ash and ozone. I signaled to stop. We left the road and moved forward as carefully as possible, hidden by the dense shadows of the forest. The smell of burning grew stronger, mixed with the disgusting stench of burnt meat and excrement, mixed with a heavy metallic smell. I carefully pushed aside the thick undergrowth in front of me and barely held back a cry of horror. A large clearing in the forest stretched out before me, completely covered with the wreckage of carts and human corpses, so mutilated that people could hardly be discerned in these pieces of meat. The entire ground was covered in blood and shreds of flesh. I immediately felt sick. My stomach was in spasms and tears were in my eyes. I knew what world I was in, but seeing such carnage with my own eyes was beyond my strength. Someone touched my shoulder and my heart nearly stopped. I spun around, making a hand seal and preparing to attack, but it was one of Senju's attendants, and he was as pale as I was. Meanwhile, the others were already hurrying towards us. I tried to pull myself together, slowly inhaling through my mouth so as not to feel the nauseating smell. It was unacceptable for the subordinates to see their commander panic. With difficulty, but I managed to calm down a little. We need to take a good look around. Maybe someone managed to stay alive. The probability is vanishingly small. But it's worth checking. You too, I looked at my clansmen and one of the Senju in turn, will guard the area. Climb higher and watch. You and I, a quick glance at the second Senju, will comb the area. Maybe we should send someone to the village with a report. Izama said. His features were sharpened by fear, and he looked like a frightened animal. Later. Let's look around first. Every second counts. We went in opposite directions and started combing the clearing. The more I looked at the dead people, the clearer I understood the picture of what had happened. Whoever attacked the caravan, they were not bandits, because they attack for profit. And bandits were not interested in food, except in a year of famine. In this case, all the goods were destroyed. And there was no point in bandits killing with such cruelty. It all looked more like the work of a maniac. Or an exemplary massacre. If the latter was true, then the purpose of this demonstration was beyond doubt. The construction of Konoha had clearly become too much for someone. Izuna-san, Senju's voice distracted me from my thoughts. I found one survivor. I hurried to him. The man was in a very deplorable state. I doubt he will live long. Do you have any medical skills? I asked my partner. He shook his head. The wounded man's entire body was one continuous burn. Such injuries were incompatible with life. The unfortunate man wheezed and weakly scratched the ground with his fingers. I squatted down, trying not to wince at the smell of burnt meat. Can you speak? In response, the same wheezing. Apparently, he inhaled hot air, which burned his vocal cords. There is only one way out, to use genjutsu. I activated the Mangekyo and said, Tsukiyomi, even torture techniques can be used for peaceful purposes. The world has lost its usual colors. Only 3 colors remain, red, white, and black. For the first time, I found myself in my own illusion. Curiosity nudged me in the back, making me look around like a child entering an amusement park for the first time. I forced myself to concentrate on the matter at hand, and turned all my attention to the man next to me. His wide-open eyes still showed echoes of recent horror. After a short interrogation, I interrupted the technique. Unfortunately, the wounded man could not tell anything significant. He only confirmed what I had already guessed: the purpose of the attack was the most brutal reprisal. I sent one of the escorts to report to Konoha and put the merchant into an illusion. Although I can't ease the pain, I can make his brain think that there is no pain. Perhaps he will survive until help arrives. Madara at the moment completely fit the description of a wild animal in a cage, with the only difference that he was not rushing from wall to wall, but was quite peacefully propping up one of them. His eyes were burning with the thirst for murder. The meeting regarding the attack on the caravan was held in one of the temporary buildings that had been built using Hashirama-san's Mokutan, and where the temporary headquarters was currently located. I finished reporting and took a breath. The memory still made me sick. It's a reprisal, then. Tobarama's red eyes now, more than ever, resembled the Sharingan. I'm sure of it. I held the mug of soothing infusion, which was thrust into my hands immediately upon arrival, with both palms and inhaled the bitter aroma of herbs. Now a large detachment was working at the site of the massacre, sent straight from the construction site. Even though we could no longer help, it was necessary to bury the dead. "We need to catch up with them," Madara said slowly. "First we need to find out who's doing this," Tobirama objected. "As it is, we don't even know who to catch up with." I turned away from the argument and went into my thoughts. There was one thing that was bothering me. There, in the clearing, it seemed to me that there were several attackers. The traces of chakra indicated this. And now I remembered something else. All these traces had one thing in common. As if the killers were close relatives. "Izuna-san, honor us with your presence," Tobirama's sarcastic voice distracted me from my thoughts. I looked up from my cup and noticed that everyone present was looking at me expectantly. Sorry, my throat suddenly went dry. I seemed to have gotten distracted. "Will you be able to recognize the attackers if you meet them?" Hashirama-san apparently repeated the question. I thought about it. The traces of chakra had some specific features, so the chances of recognizing those who did this when they met were quite high. Probably, yes, I nodded slowly. Besides, there's something else, and I told him what conclusions I had come to a few minutes ago. Well then, Tobirama took the floor again. That's an important detail. But there's one aspect that you all seem to have not thought of. And what is this? Madara raised his head. Once they learn about what happened, the merchants won't want to transport their goods to the village without serious protection. And that's an additional burden on us. Whoever was behind the attack, they calculated everything perfectly. These conclusions fit logically into my thoughts. I thought with sadness that we would have to wait for new attacks. But for now, I just wanted to be glad that this terrible day is finally over. I tossed and turned, trying to fall asleep, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I again saw the ill-fated clearing with dead bodies scattered across it. I managed to forget only by morning. I feel my way along the wall of a long corridor. It is so dark around that it is impossible to even see my own hands if I bring them to my face. I am afraid to tear my fingers away from the wall. I don't know if I will be able to find it again. It seems to me that the darkness around me is alive, and it gives me goosebumps. Finally, I notice a faint light ahead and hurry towards it. Just to get out of here. I find myself in a huge hall. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of mirrors around. And in each of them is my reflection. A fair-haired, gray-eyed girl with a figure that is far from perfect. My appearance is from another world. I walk slowly along the mirrors, carefully looking at the reflections. They are all different. Here is a schoolgirl in funny round glasses, clutching her textbooks to her chest. Here is a young woman in a formal suit, with an arrogant and mocking look. Here is a disheveled girl in a stretched-out t-shirt, sitting, leaning sideways against the wall and hugging her legs with her hands. I looked with surprise at such different and such strange images, feeling that each of them is me, that all these reflections are part of my personality. Even a brightly painted girl dressed in black leather with a bike on her back. All the mirrors are in different frames, some are simple, wooden, plastic, metal, others are real works of art, carved, forged, painted. I wandered around the mirror labyrinth for a long time until I came across a full-length mirror in a regular wooden frame at the far end of the hall. Izuna Uchiha was looking at me from the mirror. Chapter 4 I woke up exhausted and sleep-deprived. New nightmares were added to the usual ones, and what I saw at the end of my restless sleep did not add optimism. A large mirror and Uchiha Izuna in it. I was sitting in the kitchen of a newly built house, indulging in dark thoughts while the tea in the cup next to me was cooling, when a shaggy, more than usual Madara snatched that very cup from under my nose. He took a big sip and grimaced. "How do you drink this crap?" Out of old habit, I brewed the tea very strong. Besides, I haven't recognized sugar since I was 15. "Good morning to you too, dear brother," I stared into his red eyes in surprise. "Why do you need a Sharingan?" "Without it, I can hardly see anything," he added abruptly, seeing that I was about to say something. "Let's do without the lectures." I shrugged, although my heart was aching. The situation with my brother's eyes was bothering me more and more. I remembered Azuna's request to him when she thought she was going to die. And I myself understood that sooner or later this problem would have to be solved. Madara was silent for a moment, watching my frowning face, and sat down at the table opposite me, propping his chin up with his hand. Are you still thinking about what happened? How can you not think about it? Someone is ready to kill many innocent people to prevent the construction of a village. It's scary, you know. And it seemed to me that you and fear are incompatible concepts. Madara chuckled slightly. Nothing human is alien to me, I returned the smile. Breakfast? You've awakened a sense of humanity, and you remembered that your brother is hungry? I had already decided that you would continue to ignore it. Oh, come on, I snorted. I just don't want to have to do your responsibilities as well. When my brother went about his business, I decided to meditate. And not just to calm down. The vision of Azuna in the mirror was bothering me, and I thought it would be worth trying to penetrate my subconscious. But nothing worked. I successfully cleared my consciousness and entered a meditative state, but as soon as I tried to go down to a lower level, I was thrown into reality. I listened to my feelings and decided that I would give it another try. When my body became light and time slowed down, I imagined that I was in my room as it was in reality. But here, in my consciousness, the room looked different. Right in the middle of it there was a dark shaft going down. From the shaft peeked the end of a wooden staircase. I approached the ladder and began to descend, holding tightly to the rungs. The square of light above my head was becoming smaller and smaller, and a desire to go back began to arise subconsciously when my foot touched the floor. The outline of the ladder was difficult to discern in the darkness. I did not want to let go of my hands. I slowly looked around and discovered that the wall opposite me was missing. The darkness in the opening seemed alive. I immediately remembered the details of the dream with the dark corridor and the mirrored hall at the end of it. My heart thumped dully in my chest. It seemed that the path to the subconscious had been chosen correctly. Reaching my hand to the wall near the opening, I headed inside, touching the cool stone with my fingers. It seemed that the darkness muffled all sounds. My ears felt like they were filled with cotton wool. I don't know how much time passed, but the corridor didn't want to end. Fear was slowly growing in my soul, and I was about to turn back when I had a feeling that there was someone ahead. I froze, peering tensely into the darkness, trying to make out, unsuccessfully, at least something, and after a few seconds, I clearly heard someone's hoarse sigh right in front of me. It even seemed to me that someone else's breath touched my face. I quickly turned around and, not knowing where I was going, ran in the opposite direction. My heart was jumping out of my chest, but I kept running and running, unable to stop, until I realized that no one was chasing me. Laughing hysterically, I tried to feel the wall of the corridor, but nothing worked. Fear squeezed my heart again. 1 step, 2, 3, nothing changed, although I clearly remembered that the corridor was not wide. Having stood for some time to calm my frayed nerves a little, listening tensely, I was about to go somewhere, just not to stand in one place, but before I could take a step, the darkness around me thickened, and the feeling that she was alive intensified. Whispers were heard from all sides, from which icy goosebumps ran down my skin. Flashes flashed before my eyes. The strange whisper grew louder and began to resemble that unpleasant sound that occurs when you scratch glass with a nail. Blood started coming out of my nose, and I grabbed my head with my hands, covering my ears, and screamed. To wake up in my room in my brother's arms. Madara was holding me tightly to himself, his scarlet eyes sparkling. The next second I passed out. Several days passed after the unsuccessful meditation. I no longer tried to penetrate the subconscious. The very thought of it caused uncontrollable horror. The events in the village were unfolding as Tobirama had predicted. The merchants did not want to come to us without a serious escort. We had to make concessions. And now some of the shinobi were busy guarding the caravans. The situation was mitigated by only one thing. Before this, the village had been built at a rapid pace, and all the main buildings were almost ready, and 2 clan quarters were completely finished, so no one complained. At the same time, there was tension in the air, and people were expecting another blow. However, this whole situation showed a significant difference between the worlds. What happened, although it caused negative emotions, but, in general, did not surprise anyone. I could not understand it. But so far nothing out of the ordinary has happened. Madara, who at first did not leave my side for a single step, disappeared again for a long time. And this time he returned with some kind of cargo. It was impossible to understand what it was, since the object was wrapped in many layers of strong fabric. But the dimensions were impressive. I watched in amazement as my brother dragged the thing into the room he was now using as an office. That same evening we had a long-awaited conversation. "You wanted to know what I do? I'll show you." Madara waved his hand invitingly. The object turned out to be a huge stone slab, completely covered with some kind of writing. "What is this?" "Rikudo's plate. Family heirloom." "Rikudo? That one?" I remembered the legend very well, according to which Rikudo Sennin was the progenitor of all shinobi. The brother nodded. "But where did we get this slab from?" The words about a family heirloom interested me. "One of his sons, Indra, is the founder of our clan." This is news. There was nothing like this in the family chronicles that Izuna studied in her youth, and I had never come across this information before. The name itself, Indra, was familiar to me from a past life. This is the name of the Hindu god of war. I immediately remembered his weapon, the Vajra, which has the properties of a sword, mace, and spear. It is interesting that I, or rather, Izuna, had seen the stylized symbol of this weapon constantly throughout my life, on the clothes of representatives of the Senju clan. The Kamen of the Senju clan is the Vajra, the weapon of Indra. And the founder of the Uchiha clan is also Indra, only from this world. More and more wonderful, as Alice said. Only the head of the clan knows about this. Madara noticed my bewilderment. "What does it say? Do you already know?" My palms were sweating with impatience. "Yes. Although the text is written in an archaic language, and the meaning of many formulations is not completely clear. But I did not struggle to decipher it in vain. There is something I must tell you." The brother walked up to the slab and ran his fingertips over the carved marks. "But first, activate the Mangekyo." I obeyed. The signs changed immediately. Now they looked like kanji characters, but somehow different. The difference was subtle at first glance, but significant enough that the inscription could not be read immediately. Now it was clear why Madara's vision had deteriorated so much. He must have spent many hours deciphering the text. I peered at the hieroglyphs, trying to make out their meaning, comparing what I saw with ordinary kanji. It turned out to be some kind of nonsense. Shaking her head in irritation, she focused on the text again. Madara chuckled. "It's addictive, isn't it?" I sat in front of the stove for hours, trying to figure out what was written there. "Okay, don't keep me in suspense. I'm afraid I'll die of curiosity." In his quest for peace, God divided everything into yin and yang. Opposites striving for unity, in turn, form our universe. So, by uniting with our opponents, we will achieve, what? Harmony? Peace? Happiness? There is another interpretation. What do you mean? Are you suggesting that we also become related to Senju? Why become related right away? There are other ways to do it. What kind, for example? Genetic experiments? Actually, I was joking, but judging by my brother's immediate tension, my joke might not have been a joke at all. Seriously? What don't you like? Madara looked very displeased. Yes, everything. For starters, why take such a difficult path? A child from Senju and Uchiha will be exactly the unification of opposites. In this case, we don't have many options. And I won't marry you to Senju. I was surprised. Where did such thoughts come from? I didn't give any reasons. And who is talking about me? And the elders will not allow the Sharingan to end up in another clan, especially among recent enemies. Besides, they have been saying for a long time that it is time for you to get married. So get married. To Senju. On top of everything else, it will also strengthen the alliance. My brother glared at me with an irritated expression. What? This idea is no worse than what you were going to do. Do you know what exactly I'm going to do? It's enough that I know you. But I still don't understand where such thoughts come from in your head. I didn't like this whole situation at all. The conclusions Madara had come to called into question his common sense. Why take such a difficult path? And for what purpose? I had a feeling that I was missing something. A chill ran down my spine from a bad feeling. I walked down the long dark corridor again, holding on to the wall. This time the light ahead appeared almost immediately. I didn't even have time to get properly scared. Again the hall of mirrors. My legs carried me towards Azuna's mirror. Uchiha showed up in the same place, and I breathed a sigh of relief, although there were no objective reasons for optimism. After all, she was the rightful owner of this body, and I couldn't help but end up in her place, inside the mirror. However, it seemed she had no intention of making any claims against me. Well, finally, Izuna chuckled. I thought you weren't going to show up. Actually, I tried, but it didn't work. Under Sister Madara's gaze, I felt like a guilty schoolgirl who had been called to the principal's office. A nasty feeling. I know, Izuna waved my words away as if they were insignificant. I've tried to shout to you many times, but it's all in vain. Something's in the way. She was silent for a moment. We don't have much time, so I won't beat around the bush. Give your brother the eyes. What? I was taken aback. It wasn't that I didn't expect something like that. Subconsciously the thought about the eyes had been gnawing at me since the moment I woke up after being wounded, and lately, when Madara was constantly walking around with his Sharingan activated, I realized more and more clearly that I couldn't do without a transplant. But I still wasn't ready. Talk to him. The damn old men probably have a stash, let Madara shake them up about it. So you won't be left without eyes. Let's assume, I hesitated. But who will perform such an operation? There are no worthy doctors in the clan. Contact Hashirama Senju. If anyone can do everything right, it's him. She visibly winced at Hashirama-san's name. I quickly realized what was going on. You don't trust him? He will kill my brother. What kind of trust can we talk about? But maybe it won't kill me. I remembered my dream. Senju looked depressed, though determined. What if it can be prevented? Besides, it's unknown whether it will happen at all. Do you believe it yourself? I sighed heavily. Hand on heart, the version of events from the dream seemed very real. Izuna grinned again. You see. You can't underestimate the nastiness of fate. It will definitely throw some dirty trick at me. Madara is the only one dear to me. I just need to help him. Uchiha wanted to say something else, but at that moment the hall began to spin before my eyes, and I felt myself being pulled out of sleep. I heard some scream out of the corner of my ear and woke up. They say you can't breathe enough before you die. Now I could admit the truth of that statement. And even though death wasn't a threat to me, the possibility of losing my sight was akin to a little death. No matter what Izuna said, I was fully aware that anything could happen during such an operation. One wrong move and I would lose my eye forever. So, I acted like a drug addict looking for a fix. I wandered around the village like a ghost, trying to communicate more with people, and during conversations I peered into their faces until my eyes hurt. My sociability touched everyone without exception, even Senju. It got to the point that newly made allies began to shy away from me like the devil from incense, just seeing me on the horizon. My clanmates couldn't afford this, but I constantly caught puzzled and worried looks on me. I became literally obsessed. And it wasn't just people that I was obsessed with. Everything I saw, from new buildings to the grass under my feet, was scrutinized with the Sharingan. I wanted to commit every detail to memory. I knew I was behaving inappropriately, but I couldn't do anything about it. Particular attention was paid to the scrolls. I read everything, both children's fairy tales and philosophical treatises, trying to remember as much as possible. The idea of giving Madara his eyes didn't cause any alienation or rejection. During my stay here, I had become attached to him enough to make such a decision. And even though some of my emotions belonged to Izuna, it didn't matter. The conversation with Madara was difficult. Contrary to expectations, he did not want to accept the idea that they would transplant my eyes into him. My brother shook the souls out of the elders and found out that they really did have a certain number of Sharingans. And he wanted to use them for the transplant. But I understood, and Madara himself probably did too, that these eyes were too weak for him. So I just confronted him with the fact and refused to discuss the situation. The brother left, slamming the door, and returned only a few days later, upset, but no longer angry. We didn't talk about the operation anymore. Moreover, Madara said that I would talk to the elder Senju about it myself. Such a childish position irritated me, but it was useless to argue with him. Sometimes my brother showed miracles of stubbornness. Perhaps he thought that I would abandon this idea, but he attacked the wrong one. I was no less stubborn when necessary. The preparation for the conversation with Hashirama-san was more thorough than even for the diploma defense. I know a lot about perversions. One of my acquaintances from a past life used to say, gobbling up a pastry generously smeared with mustard. As it turned out, the locals were also excellent at them. The local etiquette seemed exactly perversion to me when I studied it from the scrolls in the family library. However, it is not for me to judge. In this world, etiquette played a significant role. And although recently there have been many concessions, especially concerning women, and some things are no longer mandatory, but correct behavior from the point of view of tradition was always welcomed, and I did not want to be known as an ignoramus. I had never had a chance to properly communicate with the head of the Senju clan, so the upcoming meeting made me quite nervous. First of all, I couldn't just show up at his house without damaging my reputation. He didn't have a job yet, the tower of the future village head hadn't been built yet, and Hashirama-san himself didn't hold any position, except for the fact that he was the head of the clan, and since the conversation was going to be long, having it on the ground was not an option. It was necessary to arrange a meeting in writing. I managed to cope with this with difficulty. During a detailed correspondence, the head of Senju invited me to visit him, mentioning participation in a tea ceremony. I mentally groaned. This meant that many minutes of, from my point of view, meaningless pastime awaited me. Then another difficulty arose. It was strictly forbidden for an unmarried girl to go to the house of an unmarried man alone. There would be no end to rumors later. In order not to compromise herself, she had to take one of her male relatives as a companion. The only relative was Madara, so this option was immediately out of the question. I could not go with a man who was not a relative. There was another option for the worst case, to take as a companion a respected woman of a respectable age, who had weight in the clan. I had to settle on the candidacy of one of the elders. Uchiha Satoko. Even as a woman, she had great influence and could be my companion. Having sorted this out, I realized that my torment was only just beginning. I had to think through everything: clothes, hairstyle, gestures. My head was swelling from the abundance of information, and I cursed everything in the world. Madara no longer looked upset. On the contrary, he chuckled maliciously and looked at me with undisguised amusement. A couple of times I threw scrolls at him, which he caught with a laugh and returned back. But if he was counting on something more, I disappointed him. Like hell, I'll give up. You won't get it, brother. Finally, the date of the meeting was set and I was prepared. In the morning I got up early to have time to get myself in order. The kimono and belt, prepared in advance, were waiting for their moment. Satoko-san helped me with my hair. My hair had grown out over the last few months and now it wasn't sticking out at the back of my head, but flowed down to my shoulder blades in a smooth wave. And with my hair pulled back, I hardly recognized myself. And if you add her naturally graceful figure, Izuna turned out to be a very pretty girl, and it was practically impossible to recognize her as the clan's second strongest warrior. The silk homunji, light cream in color with elegant embroidery in a slightly darker tone, fit like a glove. The belt was tightened so tightly that it became difficult to breathe. I wanted to be indignant, but looking at Satoko-san's stern face, I quickly changed my mind. I'll have to endure it. The road to the Senju chief's house was a severe test for my nerves. Uncomfortable and unfamiliar clothes constrained my movements, forcing me to move extremely slowly. I understood in my mind that leisurely walking was more appropriate for my status than my usual manner of movement, but I arrived at my destination quite tense. Although it did not show outwardly, I knew how to keep a straight face. At the gate we were met by a pretty woman, apparently acting as a housekeeper. She led us into the inner garden, where Hashirama Senju was already waiting near the tea pavilion. Then I stepped on very thin ice. Izuna Uchiha treated the tea ceremony with great mockery. Being an explosive and active nature, she did not understand how one could waste so much time on what she considered an empty activity. She did not take seriously the talk about the tea ceremony helping to take a break from the hustle and bustle, as well as cleanse the mind and soul. That was what meditation was for. Of course, if her parents were alive, they would have taught her wisdom, but there were no parents, and her brother was ready to forgive his beloved, and only, sister any liberties. I had no relevant knowledge at all before, although I had heard about the Japanese tea ceremony once. My only hope was in the scrolls I had studied with the help of the Sharingan. I must have been too lost in my thoughts, because I was jolted awake by a very noticeable blow to the back from a fan. Satoko-san's gaze could cut metal. Mentally crossing myself, I dived into the pool. I walked along the path to the tea house. She performed a strictly measured bow and a calm, friendly greeting. I scooped up water from the tsukubai with a special bamboo ladle, washed my hands, face, and rinsed my mouth. I washed the handle of the ladle after myself. When entering the house I had to bend down quite low, the narrow passage and low ceiling made this easier. I left my shoes on the threshold. The ceremony itself was hardly official, since usually more people participate. However, the realization that few people would see my possible disgrace did not make it any easier. While the water was heating up, we had a little snack. I remembered that I couldn't start a conversation first, and for the most part one respectfully remained silent, only reacting to the remarks addressed to me. After the meal, according to tradition, my companion and I were supposed to leave the house, but Hashirama Senju violated the order of the ceremony so casually that even Satoko-san was not indignant, and she was an ardent adherent of tradition. I spent the entire ceremony as if I were on pins and needles, which was greatly facilitated by the extremely uncomfortable position for me. Perhaps this ritual helped to distract from the hustle and bustle, but for me it became real torture. Afterwards, Hashirama-san invited me to walk around the garden. We strolled leisurely along the shore of the pond under the watchful eye of my duenna. It's amazing how little time it takes for chakra owners to improve the surrounding space. The garden looks as if it was laid out decades ago. Finally, we can talk about business. I told the story at length, trying not to miss any details. Both about the consequences of using the Sharingan in general, and about what is happening to Madara's eyes now. And you want me to perform this eye transplant operation? The brown eyes looked attentively and thoughtfully. That's right. You are the best medic I know. Perhaps the best ever. Why your eyes and not others? If I understood correctly, there is a choice. That's not true, actually, I shook my head. Those eyes are too weak. I don't think they'll last long for Madara. And what about you? It doesn't matter. Seeing that Hashirama-san was about to say something, I repeated with bitterness. It doesn't matter. Brother must have my eyes. For a long half-minute Hashirama Senju looked at me in silence, and I began to fear that he would refuse. Then he sighed and said, I want to conduct an examination, yours and Madara's. And also study the samples. I agreed with relief, feeling like a weight had been lifted from my soul. I flew home as if on wings, forgetting about the unfamiliar clothes and shoes, and not even tripping once. My escort was left far behind, demonstrating her displeasure with my behavior with her whole appearance, but I didn't care. I met Hikaku in the clan quarter. He looked pale and haggard. There were shadows under his eyes from lack of sleep. His good mood had vanished as if by the wind. Seeing me, he shook his head a couple of times in surprise, and then finally turned to me. Izuna-san? And the voice is so confused, as if he is not sure that I am me. Do you know where Madara-sama is now? Is something wrong, Hikaku-kun? If anything, you can talk to me too. Hikaku paused, collecting his thoughts, and said in a defeated voice. Izamu is missing. Text from manga. Visiting kimono, previously used only by married women, the tradition has relaxed and unmarried girls can wear such kimonos. Path paved with stones. Traditional Japanese pool. Chapter 5 A new picture in an endless nightmare. Madara, for some reason white-haired and with strange growths on his head, in the center of his forehead is a third eye of a deep red color, with concentric circles and 9 tomo. From the chest, from approximately the same place where Hashirama Senju's sword once, came out, is the clenched fist of some kind of creature? It's hard to call this black thing a human. My heart is pounding anxiously in my chest. Madara has died again, like so many times before. even if it was only in my dream. The situation in Konoha was rapidly deteriorating. Izamu, along with 2 other shinobi, was supposed to accompany another caravan. Having been delayed by some business in the village, he agreed with his comrades that he would catch up with them on the way, but he never showed up at the meeting place. 3 days had passed since Izamu's disappearance, and the Uchiha clan was in an uproar. Since the peace treaty had been concluded, such incidents had not happened. All conflicts had been limited to isolated squabbles and raised voices, and even less frequent fights. Both clans, although wary of each other, tried to avoid open conflicts, and fighters were immediately separated. Sometimes the heads of the Uchiha and Senju personally cleared the heads of particularly stubborn individuals, and after that they behaved as quietly as water, lower than grass. It is not surprising that this incident shook the swamp to its foundations. The Uchiha were firmly convinced that their old enemies were to blame for the disappearance of their clansmen. And, as if the external threat wasn't enough, a split was brewing within the village. Senju vehemently denied all the accusations, which did not convince some hotheads at all. Madara sent several of these zealous comrades to a hospital bed in his heart. After that, the Uchiha stopped openly expressing their discontent, but passions did not subside. All this could have escalated into a massacre. The blockheads had managed to forget what situation the clan had been in just recently. This energy should be channeled into a peaceful channel. After consulting, the brother and Hashirama-san suggested searching for Izamu with joint efforts. Shinobi from both clans formed groups of 4 to 6 people, and in their free time they combed the village's outskirts, each group its own sector. Gradually the search circle expanded, but no traces were found. Then someone came up with a theory that Izamu might have fled the village because he didn't want peace with Senju. Hikaku dismissed this theory. Understand, Izuna-san, I've known him since he was a child. After his parents died, he was raised by his grandfather. In one of the battles, his spine was broken, and now he's paralyzed. Izamu-kun would never abandon his grandfather. He's not that kind of person. Besides, he, like many others, is tired of the war. I feel like something happened. The search continued. My group included, besides Hikaku, 2 Senju, Toka and Akihiro. And if the relationship with the latter was rather neutral, then Senju Toka treated me with obvious hostility. I literally felt the malice directed at me, although it did not manifest itself outwardly. And this inspired anxiety. It was better to have an open confrontation than a stone hidden in the bosom. I absolutely did not want to get a blow in the back, so in her presence I did not relax for a minute. When it became clear that we wouldn't find anything in the vicinity of Konoha, I suggested another option to my brother. We need to not only expand the search area, but also increase the time that is currently being wasted. The brother was studying a map on which the forest around the village was divided into sectors. If we didn't return back every day, we could cover a larger area. What happened to that caravan isn't enough for you. But we're not civilians, I shrugged. There was certainly a risk, but there was no point in continuing the search as it was now. If each group has 1 shinobi of your or my level, it's unlikely that anyone will dare to attack. Our level? Then there will be only 4 groups. 3. One of them should always be in the village. Just in case. Madara looked at the map thoughtfully for some time. Okay, he agreed with a sigh. We'll set out in the morning. The next day our mission began. In the village, by the majority decision, Hashirama-san remained. I deliberately kept silent about the problems I had with Toka. Everyone had enough to worry about right now. I could only hope that in the current situation, Senju's common sense would prevail and she would not intentionally cause harm. The sun's upper edge had just appeared over the horizon when our small team set out on its journey. We moved along the upper paths, and I was mentally glad that I had not been lazy in meditating and training the skills of this body. If I maintain the necessary concentration, then I will not fall from the nearest branch. I activated the Sharingan as soon as we found ourselves in the forest. I remembered that ahead of us there was a section of strange forest and those shadows that could belong to far from harmless animals. Trouble was not long in coming. We were somewhere in the middle of a section of radioactive forest when a loud roar was heard nearby. Judging by the power of the roar, the animal that made it must have been of impressive size. I gave the signal, and we increased our speed. It was then that my hair stood on end with a bad feeling. The animal had not only not fallen behind, but had actually come closer to our group. Now its roar was periodically heard slightly behind us on the right. Whatever it was keeping its distance perfectly, and was clearly pursuing us. A decision had to be made immediately. At the nearest clearing, we'll spread out along the perimeter. I quickly give short but clear instructions. We'll set up an ambush. And finally see what kind of beast this is. The closest opening appeared after a few minutes of fast running. I climbed onto a large boulder and took cover behind a ledge so that I could see the scene from above, while remaining unnoticed. The roar was rapidly approaching. Now it was joined by a loud crack, the nature of which I did not immediately understand. But those are trees falling, the guess came unexpectedly. What kind of strength must the beast have to fell trees in this forest? After 2 minutes of tense anticipation, the owner of the mighty roar appeared in the clearing. A bear of gigantic proportions. I had never seen such a big bear. In terms of size, it could easily compete with an elephant. A very large elephant jumped out into the clearing, touching the nearest tree with its paw in the process. The tree cracked and swayed dangerously. Its huge shaggy head with eyes burning with fury was not much smaller in size than the boulder on which I was sitting. The beast rolled its eyes madly and roared again. The low guttural sound sent shivers down my spine. The creature's teeth were the size of some predatory prehistoric lizard. I took a few deep breaths and prepared to attack. There was no way to escape this monster, so I would have to fight. The best option would be to scare it enough to make it go away. But on reflection, that didn't seem very likely. I could also try to take control of the beast's mind, but would it work? After all, I still didn't want to kill anyone, even an ordinary animal. So, it was worth a try. Meanwhile, not having found his prey right away, the bear began to sniff loudly, carefully examining the clearing. His gaze, which at first seemed crazy, was not at all. Rather, on the contrary, there was too much intelligence in those eyes, considering that they belonged to an animal. This made me feel uneasy. But I didn't have time to think about my doubts. The monster clearly discovered someone, as it rushed towards the thickets of dense bushes about 5 meters away from me. There was not a second to lose. I jumped to my feet, making seals for the fireball as I went. Despite numerous training sessions, I was not always able to blow fire. Common sense from a past life prevented this, which claimed that spitting fire was not only abnormal, but also dangerous. This time the technique worked, but I felt a burning sensation on the inside of my cheeks. The air smelled of scorched fur. The bear growled furiously, turning towards me. I channeled chakra into my feet and pushed off the surface of the stone, jumping to the side. The next second, the stone crumbled under the monstrous blow of a huge paw. A cloud of stone dust rose into the air. I activated the Mangekyo, knowing that I simply couldn't blow out another fire technique. Perhaps I could still take control of his mind. Toka jumped out from somewhere to the side. She had 3 kunai between her fingers, clearly intending to throw them at the bear's eyes. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Hikaku forming hand seals for an attack. I focused on the beast rushing straight at me, trying to catch its gaze. Come on. Come on. Look me in the eyes. Just when I thought nothing would work, the beast looked straight at me. Without wasting a second, I cast a simple illusion on it. The giant bear froze mid-leap, its paws straightened out limply, and it fell to the ground. Toki's kunai ended up flying well above its head. Stop. I managed to shout. He's harmless now. A huge shaggy carcass lay in the middle of the clearing, only the slowly rising chest and hoarse breathing indicated that the animal was alive. While I was catching my breath, Toka approached the bear with the obvious intention of killing him. She had already raised the katana when I snatched a kunai from my pouch and sent it flying. Steel clanged on steel as the katana blade deviated from its trajectory. Brown eyes full of hatred stared at me. Now that's the crazy one. What does that mean? Senju said slowly, glaring at me with a furious expression. If it were up to her, I would already be roasting over a slow fire. I am against senseless sacrifices. Really? Toka smiled unpleasantly. You, and against senseless sacrifices? I find that hard to believe. Is there something you are not happy with? Stop pretending and acting like an innocent lamb. I just don't want unjustified cruelty. I tried to remember if anything had happened between Azuna and Toka in the past, but, as luck would have it, nothing came to mind. But there must be a reason for such hatred? It was unlikely to be a simple interclan feud. The male part of our group carefully looked away, trying to blend into the surroundings. Toka laughed hysterically with shrill notes. My hand involuntarily clenched into a fist. Well. Remember, Uchiha, I don't believe you. Your pretense won't fool me. I narrowed my eyes and said. I gave very clear instructions. I'll repeat the question, is there something you're not happy with? Senju grimaced in displeasure, but stepped aside. Well, that's wonderful. This creature was actually planning to snack on us, Hikaku said. So what are you planning to do? I'll dig around in his head, I shrugged, trying to maintain a calm appearance, which was quite difficult after this ugly scene. Illusions work not only on people. I can quite easily convince him that we are of no interest to him. I carefully approached the bear and threw another illusion over the current one. The work ahead was delicate and long, and I did not want the beast to wake up at the most inopportune moment. To be honest, my knees were shaking. Every second I expected the bear to wake up and cut me in half with one blow of its paw. But everything worked out. An hour later I left the clearing with a sense of accomplishment. After a while the bear will wake up and forget that he was chasing anyone at all. I had very little strength left, but deep down I was proud of myself. Killing a living creature was still considered by me as an extreme measure. Having left the radioactive area of the forest, we slowed down. This area had not yet been tested, so we had to forget about high speed. I probed the surrounding space, trying to detect at least some echo of Izamu's chakra or, at least, the recently applied elemental techniques, but nothing disturbed the natural background around. The forest ground began to slope, huge trees became rarer and rarer, they were replaced by young growth, running along the branches of which was impossible, they were too thin and simply could not support our weight. We had to go down. Ahead, a little to the side, mountains were visible. The speed of movement decreased even more, the legs were trying to catch on the rocks that were increasingly encountered on the way. The slope became steeper and the ground beneath our feet turned to mud, the tracks left on the surface quickly filled with water. We had entered a swampy area and around us, for many kilometers, the same landscape stretched out. There was no way to go around the swamp. By the time the terrain started to rise again, we were already covered in mud up to our ears, even chakra didn't help. Therefore, having seen a small river a little to the side, I immediately ordered a halt. The clearing we found ourselves in was surrounded by young, twisted trees, the smell of leaves and tree resin tickled our nostrils. On one side of the clearing the ground dropped off abruptly. The crevice stretched in both directions, as far as the eye could see. My heart sank. Getting across the ravine would be very problematic. Would I really have to go back? The river meandered between the rocks, flowing out of the forest, and crossed the clearing almost in the center. It reached the edge of the cliff and fell down, thundering over the rocks somewhere at the bottom of the ravine. Here we split up. The guys moved closer to the cliff, while I, together with Toka Senju, took cover behind a large rock. After washing ourselves in the crystal clear and damn cold water, we unsealed spare sets of clothes from the scrolls and pulled ourselves up to the fire that Hikaku had already lit. The day was drawing to an end, so we decided to spend the night here. Besides, it was worth deciding what we would do next. It's stupid to go back after one day's journey, Toka said, to my surprise. There was no trace left of her daytime anger. It would be wise to walk along the crevice, maybe there's a way to get to the other side somewhere? At night, I spent a long time looking at the stars in the sky, trying to find at least some familiar ones. The pattern of the constellations was quite recognizable, but differed from the usual arrangement of the stars. It's a pity that astronomy was never my favorite subject. Gradually, I forgot myself in a restless sleep. By lot, I had to be on duty before dawn. Madara, with dark hair again, lies lifeless on the ground. Next to him, kneeling on one knee, is Senju Hashirama. The face of the head of the Senju is covered with cracks, brown eyes with black scara look sadly at my dead brother. Not far away, next to two teenagers, one of whom was clearly an Uchiha, the same strange old man I saw before his death was hanging in the air. I woke up with my heart pounding. The bright moon was shining right into my eyes. I closed my eyelids and tried to calm my breathing. A shadow fell across my face. Toka Senju stood right above me, the moonlight flowing smoothly around her figure, making her look like a ghost. Instantly tensing, I jumped to my feet, briefly noticing that my weapon pouch was still on the ground. I had unfastened it from my hip when I went to bed. Too relaxed, idiot. Senju's sharp face twisted into a sarcastic grin. It's your turn to be on duty, Uchiha. With these words, Toka turned her back to me and headed towards her sleeping bag. I slowly came to my senses. The adrenaline was still boiling in my blood, and my heart was pounding somewhere in my throat when I settled down by the fire, preparing to guard the sleep of my comrades. Sitting by the fire, I thought about my dreams. Why do I see Madara's death, and why do my dreams seem more like a cartoon than a real image? The thought flashed through my mind that I had seen this somewhere before. I tried to grab the memory by the tail, but to no avail. A quiet cracking of branches came from the forest. I activated my Sharingan, peering into the darkness beyond the fire. No one. Probably some kind of animal. My gaze shifted to the fire again. I tried to remember what I had just been thinking about and couldn't. What difference does it make, really? It's unlikely to be anything important. Otherwise I would have remembered. The rest of the night passed without incident. When the sky in the east turned scarlet, I woke my companions. After a quick breakfast we hit the road again. The gorge, upon closer inspection, turned out to be deep enough, at least 200 meters, to temporarily abandon the idea of moving to the opposite side along its bottom. Let's leave this option as a last resort. Now the mountains, which had been slightly to the right, were visible right in front of us. If the current pace of movement continues, then by midday we will find ourselves at the foot. Large stones under our feet, although they slowed down the speed, did not affect us as much as the day before. We had already managed to get used to such an uneven road. The chakra background around still showed no traces of someone else's presence. After the night incident, Toka looked at me with arrogant superiority, periodically smiling unpleasantly. This spoiled the mood considerably, so I looked at my feet more than around. We reached the base of the mountains when the sun was already at its zenith. Its hot rays burned the skin. What next? Akihiro looked at me, his eyes slightly narrowed. His entire forehead was covered in beads of sweat. Should we climb the mountains or try to get to the other side of the gorge? I thought about it. There was no sense of any foreign presence, old or new. There was no point in climbing high into the mountains, but my intuition told me that it was too early to leave. On the other hand, the chances of us finding any traces beyond the gorge were also slim. Hand on heart, I was sure that we would find nothing in this direction. And only my innate stubbornness prevented me from turning back without being convinced of the futility of the search. So I replied, "Let's look around first." I found a narrow path among the boulders and began to climb. At first there were no particular difficulties, but gradually the path became narrower. On one side the slope stretched upwards further and further, and on the other a cliff appeared. Once I stumbled and almost fell, only miraculously clinging to a stone heated by the sun with the help of chakra and tearing off 2 nails on my right hand. After that I decided to go back. Already turning around on the path, I noticed a metallic glint below. Having carefully examined the ground, I saw at the very foot of some metallic object or part of it covered by bushes and grass. I made the return journey much faster. Curiosity spurred me on. I had to walk along the slope for a long time. The thick bushes slowed down my movement considerably, catching on my clothes and leaving deep scratches on my unprotected hands. But finding the right place was not difficult, thanks to my miracle eyes. The bush here, upon closer inspection, turned out to be taller than a human. I took my katana out of its sheath and, using it like a machete, chopped off some of the branches. A small niche in the wall opened up before my eyes. My heart started pounding like crazy when I saw a door in the depths of this niche. A metal door. By the way, there was metal under my feet, extending beyond the niche. In some places it peeked out from under the ground, reflecting the sun's rays. Apparently, it was this shine that attracted my attention. The walls and ceiling were also metal. For a second it even seemed to me that I was sleeping, so unusual did such an ordinary thing for me look in this world. The door seemed old, and at first I was afraid that the hinges might have rusted. In that case, opening it would be very problematic. But my fears turned out to be in vain. Whatever metal the door was made of, its coating clearly prevented corrosion. Right in front of my eyes, a plaque with a kanji word embossed on it was screwed to the metal surface. The hieroglyphs were similar to the ones I had seen on Rakuto's slab. After 10 minutes of continuous swearing under my breath, I managed to understand what this word meant. And this word made me shudder. Bomb shelter. A familiar word from my world. A word that shouldn't even exist in this world, simply because the locals couldn't know what a bomb was. Especially an atomic bomb. But here it is, this word, right before my eyes. And it's not going anywhere. Suddenly my head started to hurt. Feelings and thoughts, seemingly long forgotten, stirred within me and then died down again. Just below the word bomb shelter is an octagon engraved. Looking closer, I notice that it's not just an octagon, but the Bagua trigrams, which are used to represent the fundamental principles of existence. I think it's something from Chinese philosophy, but I'm not sure. The desire to open the door only grew stronger. To his surprise, it was unlocked, closed tightly, but not locked. Apparently, the shelter was not used for its intended purpose. Or they did not have time to use it. The hinges creaked desperately, but turned in their mountings. It took considerable effort to open the door. A short wide corridor appeared in front of me. On the wall to the left I found a switch. You never know, I slowly reached out and turned it to the on position. Somewhere below, an uneven hum was heard. Something hissed, then there was a loud clang. The lights on the ceiling began to flicker slowly. I looked up and saw the pins of the raised hermetic door. There were special grooves in the floor for them, now full of dust. I was mentally glad that this door was inoperative. Even chakra users would hardly have the strength to break it down, because such doors are designed to withstand an atomic explosion. At the end of the short corridor there is a concrete staircase. Already descending it, I felt that the air, initially stale, became quite suitable for normal breathing. The filtration system started working. After the stairs there was a small room resembling a vestibule. 3 doors led out of the vestibule. The first door led into a room that had been converted into habitation. Rows of bunks lined the walls, many of which had already crumbled into dust. Some had collapsed across the room, blocking it almost in the middle. The floor was littered with scraps of bed linen, blankets, and pillows. The material beneath my feet was turning to dust. The dust rose into the air, and I had to cover my nose with a cloth to keep from inhaling the filth. At the end of the room was another door. Behind it were rows of showers. Further on was the toilet. The second room was completely filled with various equipment, the purpose of which I could not understand even if I tried. Fireproof cabinets were crowded along the walls, each containing a multitude of documents. Most of them were instructions of all kinds. Everything was neatly stacked, except for one box. Someone had obviously thrown this box on the floor in a hurry. Inside were many flash drives, disks, and also storage media unfamiliar to me, and only one folder with papers, on the cover of which was the same octagon as the one on the door. Not just an octagon, but 8 trigrams. Next to the octagon is the inscription Project Kagaya. I loved all sorts of conspiracy theories and TV programs about secret research from my previous life, so, driven by my own curiosity, as well as the desire to learn something new about the past of this world, I took the folder with me. It's a pity there are no computers here. I wonder what kind of information is contained on all these disks. There were several doors leading out of this room, but they were all locked. Behind one of them, a generator hummed. The third room was a huge warehouse. It was divided into 2 parts, one for household and hygiene items, the other for food products. This part interested me more. I wanted to test one idea that had just come to mind. I looked through the shelves in search of the best preserved packages, but everything I tried to take literally fell apart in my hands. Finally, I reached the rows with cans. Many of them were damaged, but I managed to find a more or less intact can of canned fish. On the label was a large inscription, the basis of taste. I stared at the hieroglyphs with greedy curiosity, looking for the information I was looking for. And I found it. The inscription best before. And the date. October 23, 2073. It was as if I had been hit on the head with a dusty sack. This world turned out to be much more like my own than I thought. And, apparently, my consciousness had moved not only in space, but also in time. Into the future. And this future, frankly speaking, is lousy. Where did the local civilization go? Burned in a nuclear fire? Destroyed by a pandemic similar to the Spanish flu? Or maybe an alien invasion? At that last thought I chuckled nervously. My world was not perfect at all. Hunger, wars, diseases, crime, just a short list of the problems that humanity had not yet managed to solve in my time. But how did it happen that the world rolled back to the Middle Ages sometime after 2073? And how many years, by the way, passed? 100? 2? Or more? Everything in the shelter was very old, but it is impossible to determine the exact time frame. Even working wiring is not an indicator, because such objects were built with a multiple margin of safety. I clicked my tongue in annoyance. They waved a candy in front of my nose and then immediately put it away. Before leaving the shelter, I sealed the can of preserves in a scroll. They were already waiting for me upstairs. I had only been gone for about an hour, so they hadn't had time to miss me. I was glad about this arrangement. I didn't want to tell anyone about the find. No one found any traces of Izamu, which was quite expected. We'll have to cross to the other side. The plan is this. I didn't have time to finish. From the blue sky, Madara's falcon swooped down on my hand, almost giving me a heart attack. A note was tied to his paw with only one word: come back. The return journey to Konoha took much less time. We were in a hurry for a reason. If Madara told us to return, it meant that the other group had found something. The only thing that bothered me was the brevity of the note. My soul was uneasy from anxiety. Subconsciously, I expected the worst. Brother met us, gloomy as a cloud. Hikaku, who had risen in spirit, became completely dejected. We reached the clan quarter in silence. I'm not sure you should see this, Madara tried to stop me, but I went with Hikaku anyway. I don't know what I wanted more, to support someone who wasn't a stranger to me or to ease my conscience, even though it wasn't my fault what happened. Izamu's body was covered with a sheet. Now he seemed very young. Instead of 15 years old, one could give him a maximum of 13. There were no visible injuries on him, and it might seem that the boy was sleeping, if not for one but. Izamu's eye sockets were empty. Someone had taken his Sharingan. Chapter 6 Several days passed after Izamu's funeral. It seemed as if the tension in the air could be touched with one's hands. The anger that had been building up in the clan for the last few days found no outlet, because whoever killed Izamu was not a senju at all. The premonition of trouble did not leave me, forcing me to look around anxiously. First of all, I visited the place where the body was found. I was accompanied by Tobarama Senju, whose group was the author of the discovery. I was not at all delighted with such an escort. It was better to go alone than in such company. But I could not explain my motives. My brother would not understand me. I had to resign myself to it. He was lying here on the shore. Tobarama pointed to the large pebbles that made up the riverbank. And I noticed something unusual. What then? Apparently, no one tried to hide the body. It was left on display. There were no signs of a struggle around. Everything was carefully tidied up, as much as possible for a forest, of course. His hands were folded on his chest and tied with rope, as is usually done with dead people. And there are no marks on the body itself. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin. Have you found out what he died of? Basal skull fracture. Someone came up behind him. And you don't find this strange? Of course, it seems so. No one in their right mind would be so careless as to let someone approach them from behind. Either Izamu knew the killer and trusted him, or something very unusual happened here. It remains to be seen what. And here's another oddity. I carefully examined the tracks and discovered something interesting. They really do look alike. So there is a possibility that these are the same people? But then I don't understand anything. Perhaps so. But I would like you to look around here for yourself to make sure. After all, I am not familiar with this chakra. Techniques were not used here, I could say that for sure, so the chances that I will feel anything are negligible. I am not such a good sensor, it was not easy to admit, but I understood that my abilities were significantly inferior to those of the younger Senju. It was unpleasant, but true. So it was unlikely that I would notice anything new. "It's worth a try, Izuna-san," he said with a mocking smile towards me. "The traces are still quite visible." I wasn't at all sure that I would feel anything, and the main reason was not my weak sensory abilities, but the presence of a strong irritant nearby in the person of Tobarama Senju. He scared me. He overwhelmed me. Every time I had to communicate with him, I had the feeling that I was being mocked. Moreover, the transition from normal communication to mockery always happened unexpectedly, like now. I could not explain the meaning of such a transition, and it was unnerving. Incomprehensible glances and equally incomprehensible smirks brought me to a state of quiet internal hysteria. I was afraid of him, and he knew it. And, it seemed, he enjoyed it. Izuna never felt fear towards the younger Senju, only hatred. She could easily try to stab him with a kunai for any mocking look. But I am not her. And I am afraid. Because I remember how he killed me. I remember the blade of the katana piercing the flesh, cutting through skin and muscle with ease, passing right under the bottom rib, piercing through the lung and exiting the back at the spine, miraculously not touched. I remember the sound of the katana leaving my body. I remember the taste of my own blood in my mouth. And the pain that accompanied me for the next weeks. And I can't help but be afraid. The second reason for my fear was that it seemed to me that he had guessed that I wasn't Izuna at all. Or at least that he suspected something. Tobarama should have known his eternal opponent on the battlefield very well. And any inconsistencies in her behavior could not help but alert him. As if Madara wasn't enough for me. Luckily, my brother was too busy, building the village, deciphering the message on the slab, and being the clan leader. Even though I had studied all the nuances of Izuna's behavior, I needed constant concentration to realistically imitate her. It was easy to concentrate when talking to Madara, but the younger Senju was a completely different matter. In his presence, my concentration completely disappeared. So I tried my best to avoid talking to him. Of course, I shouldn't forget that fear, as they say, has big eyes, and I often recalled this proverb, but who could guarantee that my fears were unfounded? How deeply this man, who had a very inquisitive mind, had advanced in his suspicions, I could not even imagine, and this was even more frightening than the memories of death at his hand. Tobarama had an amazing sense of smell and quickly guessed my fear. And it seemed he was genuinely amused by the sight of his frightened rival. But the moments when I didn't feel his mockery were even worse. Because his attentive, scrutinizing gaze made me feel like I was on the vivisectionist's table, who was currently deciding where to start gutting my carcass. A terrible feeling. Then I need to concentrate, I looked expectantly at Senju. Alone. As you say, Izuna-san, the unpleasant mockery came again. It seemed I couldn't hide the trembling in my voice. I wanted to give myself a good slap in the face to calm down. If in the presence of other people I could at least somehow distract myself, then now it became almost impossible to control my emotions. When Tobarama disappeared from my sight, I felt an almost physical relief, even breathing became easier. I did some breathing exercises to focus and feel my chakra running smoothly through the channels. Touching the stones on the shore, I directed a flow of energy into the ground and froze, analyzing my feelings. Here it is. The chakra trace I found was the same as last time. But I felt another trace, too, and the energy I felt in it was unfamiliar and frightening. It didn't resemble chakra in the slightest as I knew it. And another smell, faint but noticeable. I tried for a long time to determine what this smell reminded me of, until I realized, this is how new equipment smells. Plastic and a faint echo of machine oil. What kind? And now I need to check the condition of the chakra channels that lead to your eyes. Hashirama-san looked at me questioningly until he received a nod. His warning was not unnecessary, as any Uchiha would definitely react to someone else's fingers near their own eyelids, without finding out the intentions of their owner. And Hashirama Senju knew this very well. The operation was scheduled for the day after tomorrow, and we were now finishing the final preparations. Madara, who had been oozing discontent until the very end, had already been examined. Now it was my turn. I felt warm fingers touching the skin around my eyes, a weak stream of chakra, breaking away from these fingers, was directed under the skin, flowing around the eyeballs, and further, along the optic nerves and chakra channels. The sensation was as if someone was tickling my brain with a fluffy feather. A strange sensation, but not to say unpleasant. Finally, Senju removed his hands. He didn't look too pleased with this. I immediately tensed up. "What do you say, Hashirama-san?" "The prognosis is not encouraging," Senju sighed, and my heart froze. "Will my brother lose his eyes?" "No, that's not what I mean." He shook his head and looked at me reproachfully. "Your eyes suit him perfectly." "Then what's the matter?" "The transplant samples we have are too weak. If I've correctly understood the mechanism of the Sharingan, none of these pairs will last you more than 6 months." "That's it. That's what I was afraid of. Going blind. But the decision has already been made, and I don't intend to back down. And I can use the remaining time to good use." 6 months is also a long time. I smiled as carefree as possible. "Are you sure you won't change your mind?" "Absolutely. I will not back down." I decided to devote the remaining time before the operation to studying the documents found in the bomb shelter. Project Kagaya. United Robotics Corporation. The only folder of papers that I had found the other day was resting on my lap. All the documents it contained were badly damaged. In some places parts of the sheets were missing. In others the text had faded to such an extent that it was impossible to read it even with the help of the Sharingan. But I managed to make out something. It is planned that this computer system, equipped with artificial intelligence, will be able to learn, think and interact with people. Using the algorithms we created, prototype robots were able to learn complex motor skills through trial and error. It is based on a new computing model, deep learning. In this model, neural networks are trained to recognize patterns from a large volume of input data. In the future, the software will write itself, which means that a machine with such capabilities will be able to learn on its own. The possibility of independent learning is, in fact, the main feature of universal intelligence. In the future, this intelligence will be able to surpass human intelligence. Project Kagaya is the creation of the world's first artificial intelligence with deep learning algorithms. The first test showed that the machine with these algorithms learned to recognize images and speech in record time. Training a neural network requires processing large amounts of data. Kagaya receives more information in a day than the average person receives in a lifetime. AI learning is happening at a fast pace. Too fast, according to opponents of this project. All the knowledge that humanity has received has been completely